Okay, now we come to the Philippine-China focus, and the focus now is, of course, the coming arbitration. And Ambassador Romero wrote on June 25th of this year in Manila Times the scenarios that he sees in post-arbitration, which is now projected to be July 12,
Yes.
when the panel will be announcing or making public its conclusions. I think the quotation Ambassador Joe Romero started with is very relevant to read here right now from John F. Kennedy. So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Why did you choose this quote from John Kennedy? Is that the situation you see?
That's very apropos, you see, because I want to emphasize the fact that we have never used creative diplomacy in solving this issue. So now is the time to exercise and we're very creative as a nation, we're innovative as a people. And I think that we should, the sooner we sit down with the other side, the better. Every country does this. U.S. with Cuba, U.S. with Russia, U.S. with China, U.S. with South Korea. That is the lifeblood of diplomacy. I've been trained to negotiate.
Yeah, even you mentioned U.S. and Cuba. The U.S. never brought it to any multinational forum, multilateral forum, I'm sorry.
Because what is involved is the national interest of the U.S. and Cuba. Nobody else is involved in this process. You know.
I think that's very, very indicative of what other countries really think about bilaterals versus multilaterals.
Yeah. We're afraid to talk about our own communists in this country, our blood brothers. The U.S. is not afraid to talk about communists who are not even American. I mean, you know, doesn't that sound surreal to you?
Yeah.
So we as diplomats, we are trained to negotiate. That is our daily task, 24/7, to negotiate. You negotiate crisis situations, you try to manage crisis situations, you reach out to the other side and see whether you can meet midway, which is what is being proposed here by China. We don't, if we never try this route, we will never get midway or halfway or part of the way.
But even farther back to the time of Cory Aquino, she went to visit China. They had a talk with. She had a talk with Deng Xiaoping. Deng proposed to shelve the controversial territorial claims and do joint development. Halfway could also mean if we do.
It could be all the way.
It could be all the way.
We will never find out unless we sit down.
We sit down and talk.
Yes.
And unfortunately, on this issue, Ambassador Orgompiena says, since he was there from the very beginning, he says, we never really had any talks, as Justice Carpio claims and the others claim, that on this issue of arbitration and resolving this matter.
Yes. Well, they always say that whenever we try to talk with China, China will always say, well, that's our territory. I mean, that you always start with
that's right.
With your bargaining chip.
I think the Philippine side, when sitting across at the table with Chinese or Vietnamese counterparts on these questions, will also say, our claim is legitimate. We stand by it. Now let's talk. You know, because that's a formal position.
Yes. You always start with your best chip.
That's right.
Well, let's go back to Sabah.
That's right. Yeah. That's one of the issues
Sabah
that
is a bigger issue than these islets and reefs in the South Pacific. And we don't even know how the arbitral court will decide. The narrative is that they will decide in our favor, and then the whole world will come to our aid, and then the whole thing is over thing. Now, we don't know it yet at that point. Well, we hope that they will favor us.
Well, the arbitral panel.
The arbitral
yeah?
panel.
But I am very sure not the whole world will come to support us, because we've been reporting South Africa has made formal statements.
Even in the ASEAN, I don't
Yeah,
know
precisely.
whether we can get the full thing of it. So we'll be forced to sit down with them. But let's go back to Sabah.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Okay, Indonesia went to war with Malaysia over Sarawak. The Philippines was about to go to war with Malaysia over Sabah. But we had a very enlightened former diplomat as president of the Philippines by the name of just Darno Macapagal. The Darno Macapagal called Sukarno and the Prime Minister of
Rahman,
Malaysia,
at the time, Tunku,
Tukul Abdul Rahman,
yeah.
who was, I think, to sit down and discuss about pan-Malayan
that's right.
state,
Yeah.
which morphed into the Mafilindo.
Mafilindo, yeah.
Okay, which now is the ASEAN. Okay, so what did they do? They said, let us set aside our claims.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, without disclaiming our claim, but just setting it aside, and then talk about how can we move forward. So we sat down, the Manila Accord, 1962, and they agreed that, okay, let us jointly develop this Mafilindo area, you know, and make it some sort of a condominium where everybody can
Has a place.
has a
ano,
place and the
and
thing.
living
You have your-
together. Yeah.
living together in peace, and there are common areas that we share, and that's with us today, and I think that we benefited from that agreement, which has metamorphosed into the ASEAN, and the promise that the ASEAN will bring to our people in terms of development and so forth. Well, that's the negotiating approach. Okay, I'm not saying that the legal approach is important. Yes, the legal approach is important also, and it's there now. So now we are in the diplomatic track, and that is something we have not yet utilized. And people say, no, don't sit down. So what is the alternative? Tampuhan. Well, that's very costly for us, because other nations are really cashing in on this Silk Road idea, on the trade with China, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, let's dwell on that a bit, because you're right here. The Chinese Maritime Silk Road Initiative can be viewed as an attempt to create trade and economic relations with the ASEAN community through the trade port and continental land bridges. And China has a much bigger agenda than just playing bully in the South China Sea. Yeah?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, I have told this to the Chinese that I met, that it is not to the interest of China to push the envelope. You know, Japan made the huge mistake after conquering these Asia with their economic prowess to bomb Pearl Harbor. I mean, that was the most stupid thing at the They bombed Pearl Harbor, and they were hit with nuclear bombs in Hiroshima thing. So they lost everything that they gained.
That's right.
China is gaining today. It's become the engine of development for Southeast Asia because of the size of its market and so forth and so on. They're not going to push the envelope, you see,
Yes.
further. So, okay, they have pushed the envelope a little bit there. That is something we have to discuss with them.
Yes, sir.
And it's wrong to portray them as the hegemon, the dragon that will swallow everything, because it's not to their interest
Yes.
to do that.
Well, actually, on July 23rd, retired General Victor Corpus
Yes.
will give a lecture to the Diliman Book Club. This is a group of professors, media people, and so on. But his thesis is that China's island building in the South China Sea is not about economic domination or hegemony, but of security.
Yes.
Because the South China Sea is the only place where the nuclear submarines of the United States can hide and launch its ballistic missiles directly at China and destroy the southern industrial regions of China. So to him, this is an existential question for China, and they will not back down. But all the rest, fisheries, oil, they can half-half, 60-40 in favor of the Philippines and other countries, but not security. What do you think?
Well, I do not approve of China's sort of pushing the envelope to the extent that they are just across from Zambales. I think that's wrong for China to do that. If they wanted to do that, they could have talked to us about it and they said, you know, can we do this and that?
Yeah.
We have allowed the U.S. bases to come into this country.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah. And all that to secure the U.S. interest.
Yeah.
Not precisely our interest,
Yeah.
U.S. interest in this part of the world.
Precisely, yeah.
Okay, you have to understand the psychology of China. The growth of China is the East Coast. It's the coastal areas.
That's right, southern, south. Yeah.
Okay, so let us go back to history and talk about how America actually and the Kuomintang attacked China.
Yes, yes.
Attacked China, and then retreated to Taiwan,
That's right.
created a military pact with Taiwan to contain China.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so and then they also did that with South Korea, and they did that with Japan, effectively containing China. Now
That's
the Obama pivot, which is brought in 60% of the naval assets of the U.S., the 7th Fleet, and now they're also bringing the 3rd Fleet, is creating some paranoia in China. Now,
Yes,
that paranoia has got to be diffused. And I think, in fairness to both sides, I think they're trying to diffuse that situation. They now naval exercises, dual naval exercises.
Yes.
The trouble is we have been collateral damage.
That's right, yeah.
When Spain and the U.S. Went to war, we were collateral
That's
damage.
right. Second World War.
America invaded us, and there was a very bloody situation.
That's right,
150,000 Filipinos died in the Phil-American War.
That's a low estimate. There are higher estimates, yeah.
Yeah, so whatever. So, the idea is when two elephants fight, the grass is trampled down.
Yeah.
Now, the Philippines is now the 12th biggest nation in the world. It's about time that we have an independent foreign policy, that we now take care of our own national interests, and then we act like an adult, and not somebody's lackey or whatever. And I think we will be respected by China.
That's definitely. I think the call for bilateral talks is an expression of respect.
I think so. It's just,
Because why would you talk to somebody you do not respect?
yeah. So we have to create this impression that we are not anybody's lackey.
And that is the
Anybody's
impression
running
of
dog.
many countries in ASEAN.
Yeah.
And we have to change that. Yes.
Yeah, and we can actually act as the honest broker between the superpowers who are now fighting over the China Sea. If we are detached from, if we only are after our own national interest.
That's
But
right.
if we are perceived to be promoting the interests of other nations, then that's going to be misunderstood.
Yes. Well, we have a lot to discuss, but we have to move on to your identification of what to expect in an post-arbitration scenario.
Yes.
You have 10 points here, and I'll read them, and you respond. And if we can put the 10 points on the screen, so that our audience can follow, no? And what you wrote is, assuming the Philippines wins the arbitration case, the following can be expected. Number 1, China will not abide by the court decision. Number 2, Philippine victory will be moral but Pyrrhic. Number 3, Pyrrhic because an aggrieved China, which will lose some face, will retaliate symbolically by some economic sanctions such as import and credit controls, but not serious enough to undermine the ASEAN plus China relationship. Philippines cannot and will not enforce the court decision. Number 5, U.S. will not intervene because their economic ties with China far outweigh their partnership with the Philippines in this particular case. Number 6, the UN will not intervene as lives are not at stake as in the case of all hotspots like Syria, Iraq, Africa, etc. Number 7, ASEAN will not support the Philippines. The Mekong Group are Chinese vassals while in the Mafilindo, Malaysia has become China's third largest trading partner. Number 8, Europe is too busy fighting ISIS and has no strategic interest in the Asia Pacific. Number 9, US and its allies, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Australia will be sympathetic and will offer to contribute in building a credible defense force of the Philippines because this will bolster their China containment policy. And number 10, Philippines will try to engage China bilaterally. Which points would you want to expand on?
Well, the last point
Yes.
first. So I think we will be forced into the negotiating table. And I don't mean that's appeasement. I don't think that's doing a Chamberlain during the Second World War. I think we're going to sit down with China and then play our hardball and say, look, we are not happy with this thing, and so can we talk about it? And China and will find out a way, a win-win situation, which will save the face of China and the Philippines. Because if we cannot enforce this thing, we will lose face.
That's right.
Why did you start something you cannot finish?
Yes, yes.
Right? And if China will also cave in, they will lose face. So there has to be a win-win situation where both of us can. But the only way to do it is to sit down.
That's right. So talk, since there's very little time, I don't think we can expect the earlier statements that we heard that we will talk only after the arbitration. It seems that this will be preempting.
Well, I'm afraid it's too late now because
Yes,
the case is coming next week and all that. But I think that the China is still open, because they also have a lot to lose.
Yes.
If they just completely discard UNCLOS.
Yes.
UNCLOS and says,
I think the Duterte said that they will not. They would prefer a soft landing to this situation.
Yeah, that's the only realistic approach to these things, actually, and I think China is expecting that sort of thing. Xi Jinping congratulated Duterte the other day and said, hoping that they're opening the door.
So I don't think the urging of the British ambassador will be heeded by the Duterte government to make strong statements in this case. So
I don't think
yes.
it's worth
and in fact, the
on.
initial discussions of Ambassador Sao with President Duterte has already yielded results in easing of the situation in the Scarborough for our fishermen, for example.
Yeah, well, take the fisheries issue. That is the most urgent thing at the moment. That China is, they say, trying to scare off our fishermen there. Well, that can be negotiated. We can approach the Atlantic approach to fishing and the one in the southern hemisphere, all that, and talking about quotas of fishing.
Yeah.
All of these things are negotiable. Yeah. There is nothing that is negotiable. That is the way we are taught in diplomatic service.
That's right. Well, we've run out of time, but I just like to say that out of 4 responses to your column, 3 favor your position, and 1 demands that you become the Department of Foreign Affairs Secretary of the new. Well, we've run out of time. Ambassador Romero, you have 30 seconds for a message to our people and our audience.
Yes. Well, the only message I have is that I just want to repeat what President Duterte said the other day. We are a Christian nation. And as a Christian nation, what is most important to us is to be the promoter of peace. Peace in the world. Peace with everyone. War is not an option.
Okay. Thank
So,
you very much. Yeah. Mabuhay po
Thank
kayo. And
Bye.
we will have future episodes with Ambassador Romero. Thank you very much, and we wait for you again for our journey next week.